I've been reading stories and r/creepy encounters for a while now, and every time I come across a creepy camping story, I think about something that happened to me years ago. I always kind of laughed it off, but even now, it still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I think about it. This happened when I was around 15, so back in 2018. I was on a weekend camping trip with my local scouts troop, camping on a big piece of land owned by one of the group leaders. It was out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere near the southern edge of the Appalachian foothills in Tennessee. Real dense woods, and the only thing out there was a tiny gravel road that ended at the clearing we camped in. It wasn't an official campground or anything, just a clearing with a fire pit, some logs to sit on, and a wide patch of trees surrounding it in every direction. The property backed right up to the national forest, so beyond the edge of that clearing was just miles and miles of woods. We were out there from Friday to Sunday, and there were probably about 15 of us, a mix of middle schoolers and high schoolers, with 4 or 5 adult leaders. It was one of those youth trips where they try to make you disconnect from your phone and spend time with God and nature. I didn't mind too much. I liked being outside, and I was close with a few of the guys. Anyway, Saturday night was when it happened. So, that night, we'd finished up dinner and were hanging around the fire, making s'mores, telling dumb jokes, typical stuff. At some point, a group of us, 5 or 6, decided to play a prank on Jake, one of the older high schoolers. Jake was 17, tall, kind of cocky, but he had this reputation for being a bit of a scaredy cat when it came to scary stories. We figured we'd sneak up on his tent and try to spook him with one of those cheap rubber Halloween masks that someone had brought. It was this ugly, old-looking scarecrow face, nothing high-tech, just plastic and string, but creepy enough in the dark. So the plan was simple: sneak up, shake his tent, then pop out wearing the mask and scream. Dumb teenager stuff. We grabbed a flashlight and started heading across the clearing towards the tents. Everyone's tents were spaced out along the tree line, kind of in a half circle. Jake's was one of the furthest, near this big pine tree. When we got close, one of us, I think it was Andrew, called out, "Hey, Jake, you in there?" Clear as day, we heard a voice from inside the tent say, "Go away." It was Jake's voice. Sounded annoyed, like he knew we were about to mess with him. We all grinned, figured the jig was up, but went ahead with it anyway. Cody, the guy with the mask, crept up and shook the tent hard. Then he jumped back and popped out from behind it, yelling. But there was nothing. The tent didn't move. There was no scream, no laughter. Cody pulled the flap open, and the tent was empty. Like, completely empty. There was no sleeping bag, no backpack, nothing. It was just empty. We were all standing there blinking at each other like, what the hell? Andrew then says, "Are you sure that was Jake?" "I heard him," Cody said. We all did. We stood there kind of dumbfounded for a second, and then someone says, "Wait, isn't Jake at the fire?" So we jog back across the clearing, thinking maybe he circled around and beat us somehow. There he was, sitting by the fire, roasting a marshmallow, laughing with 2 of the leaders. He looked up at us and was like, "What?" We asked him how long he'd been there. "Since dinner," he replied. Now look, we were maybe gone 10 minutes tops. There was no way he could have heard us from the fire, run to his tent without being seen, answer us in his voice, and then run back through the trees, silently I might add, before we even realized he was missing. It made no sense. We all just sort of looked at each other. Someone made a joke. Maybe it's a ghost. And we laughed, but it was the kind of laugh you force out when something isn't right, and you can't explain it. Later, Cody said, that wasn't just someone messing with us. That voice was his, like exactly his tone. Same little annoyed way he says, "Go away." I don't know how to explain this part. It wasn't just that it sounded like Jake. It was like someone had a recording of his voice and hit play at the exact right moment, except we never heard any rustling, no movement, just that voice from the tent, and then nothing. That night was rough. After the prank fizzled, we all went back to our own tents. Mine was a few yards away from the others, tucked near the tree line. I laid down and stared at the ceiling of my tent for what felt like forever. My flashlight was off, but I kept it clutched in my hand. I was trying to convince myself it was all just a joke. Maybe someone else in the group did a voice impression. Maybe Jake was messing with us somehow. I must have drifted off around midnight. Then, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside of my tent. Not animal noises. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate steps, crunching on pine needles. Pausing, then starting again, like someone walking in a white circle around the tent. I stayed perfectly still, heart pounding. My first thought was that it was one of the guys messing around again, but the footsteps were off. Too quiet to be someone stomping around, but too heavy to be an animal. "Cody?" I whispered, but no one answered. Then I heard a second sound, faint, but it chilled me to the bone. A whisper, right outside the tent. "Go away." The exact same tone as earlier, same voice, same cadence. My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, paralyzed. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Go away." Then, silence. No footsteps. No leaves rustling. Just dead quiet. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on my flashlight and shine it out through the mesh. Nothing. No shadow. No people. Just the edge of the trees and the faint glow of the fire still going near the center of camp. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I was one of the first ones up. I stumbled out of my tent, groggy and still freaked out. Cody came over to me looking pale. "You heard it too?" he asked. He didn't even explain what it was. He just knew. "I heard footsteps," I said, "and the voice again." He nodded slowly. "Me too." We checked around our tents. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been there. Jake swore up and down he hadn't left the fire that night. One of the adult leaders even said they'd been with him almost the whole time. We told them what we heard. They kind of brushed it off as teenage imagination. "Probably a coyote," one of them said, "or someone sleep-talking." But we knew better. I know what a coyote sounds like, and I know my friends' voices. This was something else. We left that afternoon, packed up, drove back into town, tried to pretend it was just a weird night in the woods, but every now and then, I'll hear a voice in a dream that sounds exactly like Jake's, whispering, "Go away." Sometimes I still wonder, whatever was out there, did it know we were trying to scare someone? Did it think that was an invitation? Was it just mimicking Jake? Or had it been watching us the whole time, waiting? I don't know what it was, but I've been camping dozens of times since, and I've never heard anything like that again. Stay safe out there. I've been sitting on this story for years, and honestly, it still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. It happened when I was a teenager, and it's probably the closest I've ever come to something truly terrifying in the woods. This story takes place about 12 years ago, when I was 16 and part of a co-ed outdoor leadership program in upstate New York. We weren't scouts exactly, more like a backcountry skills and survival group. Think summer camp meets low-key military prep. Once a month, we'd meet for multi-day hikes, camping trips, and survival simulations. I loved it. Until this trip. It was a crisp October weekend, and a group of 6 of us, 4 guys, 2 girls, plus 2 adult guides, were set to hike a 20-mile stretch of the Finger Lakes Trail. The plan was simple: 2 days, 1 overnight. We'd pitch camp somewhere off the trail the first night and hike the rest the next morning. Day 1 went great. Leaves were full in fall color. We took our time, stopping to identify trees, take notes, even spot a few deer. Around 5 p.m., the light was starting to fade, and we still hadn't reached an official campsite. Our leader, John, decided we'd go a bit off trail and pitch our tents in a small clearing just inside the tree line, maybe 50 feet from an old access road. The area was quiet, just trees and the distant hum of the wind. There weren't any other hikers on the trail that day. We'd seen no one since we started. The road nearby looked disused, overgrown, cracked asphalt, no fresh tire tracks. We assumed we were totally alone. We set up our tents quickly, cooked some freeze-dried pasta on the little camp stove, and sat around swapping stories until the fire burned down low. It was chilly, but not unbearable. Around 10 p.m., we crawled into our tents. I was sharing mine with a buddy, Marcus. We were both pretty wiped and fell asleep fast. I don't know how long I was out, but it was still pitch black when I woke up. What pulled me from sleep wasn't a noise at first. It was the way Marcus was breathing, shallow and tense. Then I heard it too. Engines, multiple. At least 2 vehicles coming fast down that broken old road. They weren't subtle. The engines were revving loud, and we heard what sounded like car doors slamming, and voices, male and not happy, arguing, shouting, though we couldn't make out words. Then came the sound that turned my blood to ice. Gunshots. Not just 1 or 2, at least half a dozen. Fast, echoing through the trees. Everyone froze, literally. No one made a sound. I remember trying to slow my breathing, thinking about how close we were to that road. I imagined headlights scanning the trees, catching the sheen of our tent fabric. Another shot rang out, closer this time. I looked at Marcus. His eyes were wide, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. Someone could walk right into our campsite. More shouting. Something slammed. Glass breaking. We didn't dare unzip the tent to peek. We didn't move. Then, after what felt like hours, but was probably 15 or 20 minutes, the engines started up again. Tires spun out in the gravel. The vehicles peeled off, and the noise faded into the distance. We still didn't move. Eventually, after another hour or so, John moved from his tent and quietly walked over to check on the rest of us. He whispered at each tent, making sure everyone was okay, telling us to stay put and silent until daylight. No one slept much the rest of the night. At dawn, we broke camp fast. No breakfast, just packed up and headed back to the trail, still jumpy and silent. Before we left, John and one of the other adults cautiously walked out to where we'd heard the noise, just to make sure the coast was clear. When they came back, their faces said it all. There were 3 cars in the field just beyond the road, burned out, still smoking in some places. One of the windshields had literally melted and was dripping down into the steering column like wax. The cars were shot up too, bullet holes in the doors and fenders. One of the back windows was shot through. There were no bodies, thank God. We didn't talk much on the way back. The entire group just moved in this weird, shell-shocked silence. The adults told us not to say anything until they'd reported it. We didn't even stop for lunch, just pushed through until we hit the trailhead and called for a ride back to base. Later, We learned from local news that there'd been a police investigation into a possible gang-related incident in the area. No arrests were made. No one was ever officially charged. The whole thing just faded out of the news cycle after a few weeks. But I still think about that night, about how close we were to something really bad. If they had taken a different turn off that road, or wanted a place to dump something, or someone, we weren't even supposed to be camped there. The adults made changes to the program after that. No more off-trail camping. Every site had to be official and cleared by the Park Service. We also started carrying emergency radios on every trip. I haven't been back to that trail since. So yeah, to the guys with guns, burned-out cars, and bad intentions that we nearly met in the woods that night, let's not meet. This was about 2 years ago. My family, my wife Sarah, our kids Lily and Max and I, decided to take a weekend camping trip. We live in the Boston area and wanted a quick escape to somewhere nature-filled, but not too far. After some research, we picked a small state park in Vermont with a reputation for beautiful river views and hiking trails. We booked a campsite online, and everything looked great. According to the park website, the site was right by the river, with a nice slope and a wooded area. The photo showed a pretty nice spot with good space to pitch a tent. So, Friday afternoon, we loaded up the car and drove about 3 hours. We got to the park mid-afternoon, and the sun was shining bright. It was warmer than expected for early fall, maybe mid-60s. We stopped by the ranger station to check in and get a map. The ranger was friendly, but warned us to watch out for changing weather. It could be unpredictable this time of year. No big deal, we thought. The drive to our campsite was about 10 minutes down a dirt road, winding through thick forest and rocky hills. When we pulled up, the first thing we noticed was how quiet it was. The spot was tucked up on a ledge overlooking the river, surrounded by tall pine trees. It was gorgeous. The kids were excited to explore, running ahead to find sticks and rocks. We started unloading and setting the tent up. I was trying to get everything done before the sun set, but it took longer than expected. The ground was uneven, not sandy or grassy like other campsites we'd been to, but more like loose dirt and gravel with patches of moss. Sarah was worried it might not be stable enough, but I told her we'd be fine. I put the stakes in as deep as possible. By the time the tent was up, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows over the campsite. The kids were starting to get chilly, so Sarah lit a small campfire while I unpacked the cooler. We made hot dogs and marshmallows, sitting around the fire and laughing at silly ghost stories the kids insisted on hearing. After dinner, we cleaned up, and the kids ran around a little more while Sarah and I took turns setting up sleeping bags and organizing gear inside the tent. It was getting darker fast, so we all climbed in at around 9:30 p.m. The night was peaceful at first. The sound of the river flowing below was like white noise, soothing and steady. We listened to crickets and an occasional hoot from an owl somewhere deeper in the woods. Lily was already asleep, Max was dozing, and Sarah and I were talking quietly about the next day's plans. Then the wind started. At first, just a soft rustling of the trees, but within minutes, it was whipping around the tent like a freight train. I could hear branches banging together and leaves whipping past our windows. "Is it supposed to get this windy?" Sarah asked, a bit worried. "I don't know. Maybe just a passing storm," I said, trying to keep calm. I zipped up the tent flap and pulled the rain fly tighter, but the wind got worse. It pushed against the tent walls like someone was trying to squeeze in. One of the poles popped out of the ground with a sharp crack, and suddenly the tent was sagging. "Hold on, kids," I shouted. Sarah grabbed the poles inside, trying to brace them. The tent flapped violently. Rain started to sprinkle in through the gaps, and my heart was pounding. I knew the ground was loose, but I didn't realize just how unstable the whole ledge was. "Dad, it's really scary," Max whispered, clutching my arm. "Stay close, buddy. We're gonna get through this," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. For what felt like forever, we fought the storm. Every time I tried to put a pole back in the ground, the wind yanked it loose. The rain was cold, soaking through our jackets and sleeping bags. Sarah was crying quietly, trying to calm Lily. Finally, the wind started to die down. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the tent settled in its half-collapsed state. We sat there, cold and exhausted, listening to the river roar beneath us and wondering if the tent would hold until morning. When the first light came, everything looked peaceful again. Birds chirped, the sun warmed the damp earth, and the storm was a memory. That's when I looked outside and saw the edge. Our tent had been set right up on the edge of a cliff, a 60-foot drop, straight down to the river below, with jagged rocks lining the shore. I felt my stomach twist. One of the broken tent poles was balanced on the very brink of the cliff, just inches from slipping off. If the wind had pushed the tent a little more, if that pole had shifted, or if the ground had given way, we could have fallen. I could barely breathe thinking about it. We packed up as fast as we could, the kids quiet now, sensing something was off. On the drive home, I kept looking back at the trees disappearing behind us and felt a mix of relief and guilt. I keep thinking about how close we came to disaster and how we didn't even know it. Dear listener, this story contains descriptions of medical trauma, caregiver abuse, including implied sexual abuse. Please proceed with care. This is going to be long and probably hard to believe. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if someone else posted it. But I lived it, every second, every breath, and I need to get it off my chest. 3 years ago, I was in a car accident, a bad one. I was 29, healthy, independent, living alone in Pittsburgh, and working as a lab technician at a hospital. One rainy night, someone blew through a red light and T-boned my car. The impact caused a traumatic brain injury and spinal cord damage. When I woke up weeks later, I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink at first. But I was aware. I heard everything, felt everything, thought clearly. I just couldn't respond. The diagnosis, locked-in syndrome. It's rare, but it happens. Basically, your brain is mostly fine, but your body is frozen. People assumed I was in a vegetative state. The doctors explained to my family that there wasn't much hope, that if anything changed, it would take years. And so, I was placed in long-term care. That's where I met Monica. At first, she seemed like a blessing. Mid-30s, chipper, always humming when she came into my room. She was one of the regular night nurses at the care facility. I learned her name from the way others said it, cheerfully, trustingly. But as weeks passed, I noticed something was wrong. She didn't talk to me like the others did. Most nurses would narrate what they were doing, even if they believed I couldn't hear. "Okay, Emily, time for your meds," or "let's clean you up." But Monica was silent, clinical, detached. And then came the first time. It was maybe 2 a.m. I was lying in bed. I heard the door open, footsteps approach. Monica. I recognized her perfume. She didn't turn on the lights. I felt the blanket pull down, and cold air hit my chest. Then her hands, not adjusting tubes or checking vitals, touching, inappropriate. I wanted to scream. My mind was thrashing, but my body lay still, like a corpse. After a few minutes, she left like nothing happened. I stayed awake until morning, tears leaking out of my eyes. No one noticed. This became routine. Not every night, maybe once or twice a week. Sometimes she whispered things. I don't remember the words exactly, just the tone, like I was a toy, a thing. Other nurses never suspected anything. They all liked her. Sweet Monica. Hard-working Monica. I tried to find ways to signal them. I focused everything I had into blinking or twitching a finger. Sometimes they thought I was reacting. Maybe a spasm, they'd say. Maybe there's a little activity. But no one understood I was trying to speak. I wanted to die. Months passed like this. I lost track of time. I hallucinated. I stopped trying to move. Then came the breakthrough. One afternoon, a neurologist came in with a research assistant. They were testing a new kind of eye-tracking device, like a keyboard for patients who couldn't move. The assistant, Lauren, placed a camera in front of my face and asked me to look at a screen. "Can you try to follow the dot with your eyes?" she asked. I did. For the first time, someone noticed. She gasped. "She's responding. Look, she's tracking it." They calibrated the software, and over the next week, I was slowly able to spell out words. It was exhausting, like running a marathon with your eyeballs, but I didn't care. When I spelled my name, Emily, the entire room went silent. Then someone cried. I thought, finally, I'm saved. But that was just the beginning. Lauren became my primary therapist for the device. She was amazing, patient, kind, careful not to overwhelm me. She asked yes or no questions I could answer by looking left or right, and eventually started letting me spell things out. The first word I spelled, help. She looked confused. What kind of help? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Part of me was terrified. What if Monica found out I could communicate? What if she retaliated? But Lauren kept coming back, kept encouraging me. So I started slow. I spelled night, then Monica, then bad. Lauren didn't understand at first. She's your nurse, right? What about her? It took several sessions, but eventually I spelled it out. She hurts me. Lauren went pale. She wrote everything down and promised to tell someone. I begged her to be careful. I was terrified Monica would come into my room and punish me the way she had before, touching me, whispering in my ear, treating me like an object. To her credit, Lauren believed me. She alerted the supervisor. An investigation was quietly opened. Security cameras were checked, schedules compared, witnesses interviewed. But here's the thing. Monica was smart. She never did anything obvious on camera. Most of the abuse happened in blind spots. The physical evidence was minimal. And worst of all, no one had ever seen her act inappropriately, except me. Lauren advocated for me hard. She even got a psychiatrist to evaluate whether I was lucid, and I passed with flying colors. With the eye-tracking device, I could now answer full questions, name dates, describe incidents. I told them about her routine, her gloves, the things she whispered. Eventually, the administration suspended Monica, pending investigation. I thought that was it, but then she came back, 2 weeks later. They told me the evidence was inconclusive and that she had an exemplary record. They assigned another nurse to be present during her shifts, but only during scheduled meds or procedures. The rest of the night, she still made rounds alone. The next time she came into my room, she shut the door and stood over me. I was shaking inside. She leaned down and whispered, "You really think they'll believe you? You're a fucking vegetable." Then she smiled and walked out. That night was the worst of my life. The next morning, I begged Lauren, through the device, to move me anywhere, another facility, another room, just not here. She talked to the director, and by some miracle, they agreed. 2 days later, I was transferred to a different facility in another part of the state. Monica didn't know where. It was like stepping into sunlight after years underground. The new staff were incredible. They trained with the eye-tracking device. They listened to me, talked to me, treated me like a human being. Over the next year, I improved a lot. I regained slight movement in my right hand and could grip soft objects. I could twitch my toes, and eventually, I started vocal rehab. Today, I can speak in short sentences. I still use a wheelchair. I still need care, but I'm me again. Last month, I testified via recorded video and written statements in a case brought against Monica. Turns out, I wasn't her only victim. Another patient, a nonverbal autistic man, had suffered under her care. No one had ever asked him what happened, but when they reviewed his charts and matched up his panic reactions with her shifts, it started to form a pattern. And me, I was the one who broke it open. The case is ongoing, but she's been arrested and stripped of her license. Sometimes I still see her face when I close my eyes. I wake up sweating, hearing her whisper. But most days, I wake up free. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you ever have a loved one in long-term care, pay attention. Look at their eyes, read their faces, talk to them, even if you think they can't hear. Don't assume silence means peace, because I was screaming the whole time. This was years ago now, but it still creeps me out, not because of what happened to me, but because I think I may have seriously traumatized a group of civilians without ever saying a word. I was in the middle of Marine Corps basic training at the time. We were doing a nighttime navigation and evasion exercise deep in the woods of North Carolina. If you've ever been through it, you know the drill. No light, no GPS, just a map, a red filter flashlight, a compass, and your wits. The goal was to move from one checkpoint to another without being captured by instructors pretending to be the enemy. They don't tell you the route. You just get coordinates and you figure it out. And they don't tell you how close you'll be to civilian areas. Most of the time you're well within base perimeter, but sometimes, especially during more advanced training, you're near property lines or bordering public land. I remember that night because it was colder than it had any business being for late spring, and I was already tired as hell from a 20-mile forced march earlier that day. I was sore, hungry, and just mentally done. So when I plotted my route and saw a shortcut that cut through a stand of woods on a slightly lower ground, I took it. It wasn't an approved path, but it would get me to my next checkpoint a full 15 minutes faster, and maybe I could lay low a bit to catch my breath. Now here's the part where things get weird. I'd been moving through a forest for a while, quietly, slow steps to keep from cracking twigs or making noise. The moon wasn't out, so I was working under near pitch black, just the red glow of my flashlight every few minutes to recheck my heading. Then I saw it, a glow, soft and orange, bleeding through the trees. At first I thought it was one of the instructors setting up an ambush camp, so I froze and got low behind a tree. The light didn't move, and there were no sounds of boots or gear clinking, no chatter, just this steady fire glow and the occasional murmur of people talking. I moved in closer, staying off trail and low to the ground. I couldn't see anyone clearly at first, but as I got closer, maybe 30 or 40 feet, I realized it wasn't a military setup at all. It was civilians, 5 or 6 of them sitting around a small bonfire, bundled up in fleece jackets and knit caps. They were drinking from tin mugs, laughing softly, and occasionally looking over their shoulders into the woods. I could make out backpacks, coolers, even a Coleman lantern. Real campsite vibes, and for some reason I'll never fully understand. I didn't stop. I didn't call out. I didn't even backtrack. I just kept walking. I'd already committed to my heading, and I figured, hell, this is probably private land they don't even know is shared with the base. I figured if I just walked through calmly, they'd assume I was supposed to be there. So I stepped out of the woods. I was in full camo, face paint, helmet, pack, and carrying an M16. The only part of me that didn't look like a ghost was the slight shimmer from sweat and dirt. I must have looked like something out of a damn horror movie. I didn't say a word, didn't make eye contact. I just walked straight through the glow of the firelight, about 10 feet away from the circle, and passed back into the darkness on the other side. I didn't hear anything at first, but maybe 3 seconds after I crossed the clearing, I heard gasps. One of them whispered, "What the fuck?" And another said, louder, "Did you see that?" Like they weren't even sure I'd been real. I kept walking, kept my pace steady, not reacting. I made it about 100 yards into the woods before I ducked down, got behind a fallen log, and finally let myself breathe. And here's where the guilt set in. I realized I just walked through a group of totally normal, innocent people who were probably out there on some chill weekend getaway. And what did they see? A silent, camouflaged man with a gun walking straight out of the trees, right past their fire, and disappearing again without a word. They didn't know it was training. They didn't know there was a military base nearby. Hell, for all I know, they thought I was a ghost, or some kind of killer, I guess. And the thing that makes it worse, I didn't tell anyone. I just went on with the exercise. We finished that rotation at dawn. I hit all my checkpoints, got a pat on the back, and had breakfast like nothing happened. But I kept thinking about that group, those people sitting by the fire. I kept wondering what that night was like for them. Did they scream once I was gone? Did they pack up and run? Did they stay frozen in fear, too scared to move or speak? Did they report it? I went back later that week on a pass and tried to figure out exactly where I'd been. I'm almost certain that section bordered some public access land, maybe state-owned, or a backcountry camping zone. It wouldn't have taken much for the military boundary to blur a little in those woods. I never heard anything about it on base. I like to imagine they figured it out later, maybe looked at a map, saw that they were next to Camp Lejeune or whatever, and shrugged it off. Maybe one of them used to be military and recognized the gear and realized it was just a boot in training. But there's a part of me that's pretty sure I wrecked somebody's nerves that night, because if that had been me, if I'd been sitting there and saw a guy walk out of the forest with camouflage, face paint, and an M16, not say a word, and just disappear, I don't know how I'd sleep after that. I think about the way they froze when I passed through. I think about the look on one guy's face, mouth slightly open, mug halfway to his lips, just staring at me like he couldn't believe I was real. And I wonder what they tell people now. I'm a 28-year-old solo traveler from the UK. I'd been saving up for a while to take a month-long trip across Europe, and everything was going perfectly until I booked that damn Airbnb. It was in a small town in southern Spain, a place I'd never heard of before. The photos were straight out of a travel magazine. Rustic charm, a private pool, surrounded by olive groves. The host, Maria, had a 4.9-star rating with dozens of reviews. I felt I'd hit the jackpot. I arrived late on a Friday evening. Maria wasn't there to greet me in person, but she left a note taped to the front door with a small brass key and a warm message in neat cursive. Bienvenido. Make yourself at home. Wi-Fi info is on the fridge. Please message me if you need anything. P.S. The cellar is locked. Please don't try to open it. Gracias. Weird thing to mention in a welcome note, right? Still, everything looked exactly like the photos. Cozy, rustic, very Instagrammable. The furniture was old but well kept, and there was fresh fruit and wine on the table. I was tired from traveling, so I didn't overthink it. I took a hot shower, poured a glass of wine, and sat out by the pool under the stars. It was so quiet, like too quiet. You don't realize how much ambient noise there is in daily life until it's gone. No cars, no people, no dogs barking, just the occasional rustle of leaves or distant howl. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping on the window next to the living room. It was just 3 taps, deliberate, sharp, not like wind or an animal. I stood frozen with my wine glass mid-air. Nothing. I turned on the patio light. The yard was empty. The next morning, I shook it off. Jet lag, stress, overactive imagination. I went into town. Cute place, very sleepy. There was one small cafe, a pharmacy, and a few older locals milling about. I grabbed a croissant and espresso and wandered back to the house. When I got back, I had a missed call and a voice message from Maria. Hi, I hope you're settling in well. Just wanted to check in and see if you needed anything. Oh, and please don't go into the cellar. It's locked for a reason. That was it. Her voice sounded flat, like someone reading from a script. I replied, just saying things were fine and thanking her for the wine and fruit. She didn't respond. That afternoon, I explored the property more. The olive grove behind the house stretched for what felt like miles. I found the cellar door on the north-facing wall of the house, mostly covered in vines. The lock looked brand new, shiny, chrome, heavy-duty, definitely not from the same era as the rest of the building. I took a photo, mostly because it struck me as weird how the door seemed deliberately hidden. Later that evening, I was flipping through my photos while eating dinner. I zoomed in on the picture of the cellar. That's when I saw it. In the window's reflection, right next to the door frame, was a face. Not mine, not Maria's, just a pale, hollow-eyed face, staring directly at the camera. I dropped my phone. When I picked it back up, the face was still there. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. The skin was grayish and the mouth slightly open, like it had been caught mid-scream. There was no one there when I took that photo. I was alone. I was sure of it. I deleted the photo. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I heard soft thumps coming from below the floor, maybe pipes or rodents. At some point around 2:30 a.m., the hallway light turned on by itself. I just lay there, not moving, under the covers like I was 5 years old again. I stared at the crack beneath my bedroom door and waited for a shadow to pass. Nothing did. I eventually passed out from sheer exhaustion. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. I left the house and drove along the coast to distract myself. When I came back in the evening, something was off. One of the bedroom doors I hadn't used was slightly open. I was certain it had been closed before. I pushed it open, expecting, I don't know what, but the room was normal, except for one thing. A small key lay on the bed, antique-looking, made of black iron. It wasn't there before. I would have noticed it. I picked it up. It was ice cold. I pocketed it without really thinking, just instinct. Then I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I messaged Maria asking if someone else had access to the property. No reply. That night, I barely slept. I kept that key under my pillow like some kind of talisman. In the early morning, I thought I heard whispers outside my door. Not words, just the rhythm of whispering, like a conversation was happening just barely beyond comprehension. I sat up, held my breath. It stopped. I don't think I even blinked for 10 minutes. The following morning, I called Maria. She answered, but she didn't say anything at first, just silence. Then, "You shouldn't have gone near the cellar." "What is this place? Did something happen here?" I asked. More silence. Then she hung up. I packed up everything. I was done. I didn't care that I had another 4 days booked. I threw my bag in the car and left. I drove straight to the nearest hotel in Malaga, checked in, showered, and tried to act like everything was normal. That night, I slept for 10 hours straight. I didn't leave a review. I didn't message Maria again, but something still wasn't sitting right with me. So a few weeks later, I started digging. I searched the house address and found a handful of old records. The property used to be owned by a family called the Estradas in the early 80s. They had a daughter, Lucia, 14 years old. In 1986, she went missing, disappeared from her home, never found. I couldn't find any follow-up articles, just a brief mention in a Spanish newspaper archive. No arrests, no resolution. I asked a Spanish-speaking friend to help me check a local forum. Buried deep in a thread about urban legends, someone mentioned that same house. They said locals believed Lucia had been kept in the cellar, that her father, who went mad, might have locked her down there after she started seeing things. Apparently, the house sat abandoned for over 20 years before it was bought, renovated, and put on Airbnb. I tried to find Maria's full name, or anything linking her to the Estradas, but her Airbnb profile had been wiped, vanished, like she never existed. I even went back a few weeks later under a different account. The listing was gone. Look, I don't know what happened in that house. Maybe the key unlocked something, or maybe I was already being watched. Maybe Lucia is still there, in some form. All I know is that something was wrong with that place, deeply wrong. I keep thinking about that face in the window reflection, how it looked like it was screaming, but made no sound. I don't know if Maria was protecting guests, or covering something up, but if you're ever traveling and something feels off, leave. Trust your gut. It's better to lose money than lose your mind. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to ad-free videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.